Well, hi everybody. It's ForecastYear here for another exciting episode. I want to talk to you about situation in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Russia, NATO, EU, and what's going on there, and what's likely to play out in the future. Now, there's been talk lately that the Russians may have supplied weapons to some rebel separatists in the southeast part of Ukraine, and possibly the Russian army itself or military is directly involved, possibly. It's hard to confirm accurate reports, but anyhow, there's been a major push by the rebels, and it appears that they've gotten a refreshed supply of weapons and weapon systems from Russia. So we're going to find out accurate information as time comes out. Today is August the 28th, by the way. So today is 2014, August 28th. And again, today they said that the separatists have made a major push back on the Ukrainian army, and that likely they're being resupplied by the Russian army. You know, there's talk about whether Ukraine is culturally two different countries or multiple different countries, and whether they can easily hold it together, both economically and otherwise, given the situation that they're economically in a tough spot. But also, if you think about it, in this part, or it's kind of the western part of Ukraine here, this shows the north and the south, but I really see it as east and west Ukraine. Western Ukraine is more westernized and EU friendly. They speak Ukrainian typically, and they tend to be more religious. The people on the eastern side are much more closely aligned with Russia, especially near Kharkov and cities like that. They speak the Russian language, and they have much closer trade and business ties with Russia. It's more industrial type area here on the east, and on the west is more agrarian and more based on farming. We think about, you know, the stereotypical image I have of Ukraine, of a great place where they grow a lot of wheat, and they have a steppe, kind of like a flatland, kind of like Texas, you know. And ironically, we have a city in America named Odessa, Texas. We've got it's kind of similar geography in some ways, I suppose. So anyhow, these are kind of culturally a mix of different countries and different peoples in a way. And some people argue that's why it was easy for Crimea. I mean, that they culturally related to the Russians. The Russians have a massive naval base there, which has got a huge influence on the community there. So, and they speak Russian and all this. But a couple things to consider. I mean, Russia has very few warm water ports. They're going to be highly motivated to take this region here in the southeast, connecting Russia to Crimea. Strategically, they don't have a lot of warm water ports for their navy. Even down here, they've got to get through this Straits of Dardanelles down in Turkey to get out to the open sea. In the north, they've got a few tiny areas out near Lithuania and that, but those are iced over much of the year. So, you know, they're highly motivated to grab this for a variety of reasons. You can argue whether that's moral or immoral, but whether we're going to be able to stop them, I think it's unlikely that we're going to be able to stop them from seizing this area, which some people are calling Nouveau Russia or Novo Russia on this map. I believe that the split will be, rather than north and south, it will be mostly east and west along this strategic river that they call the Dnieper River. So I don't think they're going to go all the way to invading all the way to Odessa, for example. That's quite far west. Maybe they will. Supposedly Russia's got some garrison of soldiers here over in Moldova, between Moldova and Romania. It's called Transnistria. They have another bastion of military. So theoretically they might encircle Ukraine and choke them off. I see that unlikely as happening. It's important to know, though, that this is the historical old version of Nouveau Russia. All right, so this concept of Nouveau Russia goes way back more than 100 years ago. There was a new Russia term even back then, where a lot of people there spoke Russian. They were connected to the Russian, the Russians. But we have to think about whether we really believe NATO is going to intercede very much in Ukraine. Ukraine's not part of NATO. Not yet. There have been discussions about it for quite a while, where they're thinking about joining NATO and the EU and all this business, but it didn't quite happen. And I think Vladimir Putin sees his chance and sees his opportunity with America distracted with the ISIS problem over in Iraq and Syria, and also a variety of other economic problems that we're facing that are quite serious. And also, he knows we're going into an election year too. It's just not going to be easy to start a war and going into a midterm election. He knows all those things. We're also going into a thing called winter, and the Russians have typically done well fighting wars in the wintertime. They have a unique advantage. It can get real cold in Ukraine, and Ukraine, by the way, unfortunately, does not have a lot of oil. Their oil, their gas, typically has come from Russia, and now they have very little money. They're on the brink of bankruptcy, and so they're in a real bad situation with respect to how they're going to have the resources to fight a war, or even including petroleum resources to engage the situation. Europe is also in a tenuous situation. They get a major amount of their oil actually from Russia. Russia knows this. They're holding a lot of the cards right now geopolitically, and they're not dumb about the situation. A report was done by the German army about 5 or 10 years ago about peak oil, and in the report, basically, it had a lot of scary conclusions. One of them was basically they need to maintain good relationships in Germany with the oil exporting countries, and chief among them, their main one was actually Russia. They're well aware in the German army about their relationship strategically to Russia, and how important it is to keep things on an even keel with all their geopolitical partners, including Russia and the United States, and kind of walk a middle line on this thing. I think NATO is going to be very reticent at the end of the day to get heavily involved in this thing, especially when it comes to dealing with the situation in areas where they speak Russian and it's a Russian majority. The people there basically have already pushed back heavily against the Kiev government that was inserted into power apparently by the U.S., the CIA, the U.S. State Department, and other powerful people, the kind of neocon types that wanted a certain kind of leadership in there that was going to favor a Western agenda. And it circumvented the democratic process. The guy they kicked out before was actually the one Democrat that elected that was siding more recently more with Russia. So you can argue back and forth on this thing about who's got the moral right, but we're just going to talk about what's likely to play out and versus what's fair. Another historical context recently look at, historical parallels, the Russian-Georgian War. Remember, this was back then, was instigated mostly by Georgia. They officially fired first on South Ossetia. Russia then came in very shortly thereafter. Then they returned to bases, everybody. There was peace settlement after about 5 days of shooting. We had George Bush back then. He was a lot more willing to get into a violent shootout and a war with other countries than Obama. Obama does not have the war-fighting skills, and I think Putin is well aware of this. I think we're all aware of it. Okay, so that's kind of a main summary on the situation in Ukraine as we see it playing out. This area here, especially between the Dnieper River and over to Kharkov here, this area, I believe, will be seized completely by Russia, and that we will not have the spine to stop them. This area, I think it's unlikely, especially Odessa. It's a strategic city for Ukraine. They need a warm water port. They can't afford to be a landlocked country. That would put them in a fix. So I see them being able to hold Odessa long term. They know strategically they need it. But the Dnieper River, this area, I see the dividing line kind of around the Dnieper River, basically, is what I see happening here. So Dnieper River up to Dnieper and over to Kharkov, this area will probably end up falling into Russian hands. And I think that's all she wrote. We'll see how this thing plays out, but it looks like it's going to be a real zinger, one to watch. It could be the opening stage to World War III. I hope not. I want to remind you also we have not been in direct combat with Russia. The USA and Russia is one of the few countries we have not gotten into direct combat with, I believe, almost ever. If anything, they were our ally in World War II. We were fighting the Nazis with the Russians. And they're one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Everybody knows this. So I think that there's a lot of hesitation to get into a shootout, especially if they're not sure it's a shootout we can win. These populations, this area, the locals heavily side with Russia. It's going to be a tough uphill battle for us to go in there and grab it, because we're just not going to have local support, and that's the number one thing we would need. because of that and a variety of other things, I just don't see us being able to grab and hold this piece of land. You can argue about whether that's fair, right, or wrong. That's just how I see this thing playing out in the near term. Stay tuned for more information. I do think this thing is going to spiral out dramatically, like the ISIS situation and also Ebola. We got some of these kind of problems going on at the same time, and the Russians know this, that our leadership is not going to be able to handle all of them. So I don't see us being able to intercede strategically, and the sanctions aren't really going to stop the Russians that much. Thanks so much.